Welcome, TLA. I'm here with Peter Ramsey from Built from Mars. You might know him from a rather popular piece that he's recently put out, 6 chapters of UX for banking. And welcome, Peter. Pleasure to have you this afternoon.
Oh, yeah, cheers.
So wanted to get maybe just a bit of background, introduce you to the listeners today, just an understanding of your background in UX and kind of what led you to push forward and examine the banking industry in the way that you have.
Sure. So I guess a whistle-stop tour of my background. So I had the classic kind of Silicon Valley cliche story of dropping out of uni, starting a company, me against the world on some crusade, nearly failed a bunch of times, but in the end kind of made quite a good run of it. Sold my Fintech startup in 2018. And then after that, I basically didn't know what to do with myself, which I've now found is like a really common story. So I was just kind of helping friends of friends with their products. And it started out just general advice. And then, looking back at my time as like a founder CEO, I was like, what do I enjoy the most? What do I want to spend my time doing? And really it was just building stuff. Like, I think building stuff is really interesting. And, if there's a way you can build stuff to be better, like even more interesting. Right. So yeah, I just helped friends and then word of mouth, and I never did any marketing. And then for 2 years, I was a full-time UX advisor to some pretty cool companies around the world. And then I started the Built for Mars blog late into 2019, just as like a side thing, really. And then, yeah, that's kind of what's kicked off, and I now run that. So it's
excellent,
pretty organic.
Very good. So we're going to be talking a little bit, particularly in detail, about the work that you've done on the UX for banking. I think just to preempt that is a little bit is the definition, which regularly gets confused between CX and UX in this space, about customer experiences and designing for user experience. So just want to get your take on what we're going to be talking about and how we'll be dividing the two.
Yeah. So I would say that the line between the two of them is very blurry. So I like an example of like a car is quite an easy one to visualize. So UI, so the user interface, would be like how nice the concept car looks and the materials you've used and where everything is like laid out. And then UX would be, can you find the volume button at night going through a tunnel, right? Like, can you fumble around and find the right stuff? And if you look at cars like Teslas, for all they're worth, the experience of touching a screen while you're driving is quite difficult, right? Like, you have to judge where this stuff is. So customer experience, I think it's just like a more broad way of saying, that includes, for example, customer support. Like, can they solve your problem quickly? So customer experience is like user experience, but like kind of transcends the software world into, what do your employees wear? Things like that.
Very good. Yes. So looking at it from rather than the specifics of individual touch points within that particular customer journey, a CX would look at a kind of from a higher level of the overall experience that they have with that product, service, or whatever it is. So you chose then to analyze the banking industry and really critically define certain key parts of those various user experiences that the current, the older generation banks, as well as the new disruptive banks coming into the market, defined. Although you covered many different subjects within the 6 chapters, clearly the app was a focal point of your analysis. Kind of what led you to define that? Do you see that the app and the mobile kind of relationship that people have with banks as the defining characteristic now?
So I'll tell you what, I've done tens of interviews since this came out, and you're the first person to ask me that, which I think answers the question of, most people just assume banking is on an app. It's like taken for, like you just get the app up, right? I can't remember the last time I logged into my online banking on a desktop that wasn't to do this study. So I think for me, it was like, I knew that the experience of doing some stuff on the app was going to be worse for some of the banks. Like the international payments, I knew that you wouldn't be able to do it through the app, right? So when I got to that chapter, I knew there'd be a pretty wide spread of like experiences. If I was to do desktop, I would have had to do different sizes of screen, different browsers. There's a million different combinations, whereas iOS app to me felt quite like safe, quite standard. Yeah.
So, so with that in mind, actually, and we'll get into the details of this later on. But do you think that that's one of the advantages the newer banks and other fintechs have had, is that they can design the overall experience from a mobile first standpoint, whereas the traditional banks are having to back into this?
It's definitely one of them. Like that's one of the major advantages is, they, there's loads of different ways I could talk about this, but like the incumbent banks do hundreds of things on hundreds of devices, different financial services products, they've built up a lot of stuff, and these challenger banks only have to do iOS and Android apps really well. And so it is a lot easier for them, so yeah.
Do you feel also, so obviously, the legacy systems, the technical debt that these, as you said, these banks, the incumbents have, and the fact that they offer normally considerably more services and systems that are needed to run those. So that's obviously a limitation for them to being able to innovate and develop these cutting edge kind of experiences.
Yeah. So
in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, yeah. I mean, I've, since this has come out, I've worked with some of these banks, incumbent and challenger, and the incumbent banks, they're not idiots. The people that work there are decent at their job, right? It's not the case of, the incumbent banks is where all the 50-year-olds go to work who don't know about design, and everyone at Monzo is 16 and they love TikTok, right? Like that world is not how it happens. The incumbent banks, they don't know how bad they have it because there's so many departments. They're like, we want to change this thing. Okay, that thing's actually run out of a Singapore branch of office, like a team in Singapore runs that or whatever, right? It's like, God, I mean, they're held down by a lot of weight. Yeah.
It is tough, and kind of lean on my next point of within UX about creating flow, like natural flow instead of, in this case, fragmentation. But as you say, you've got multinational banks, different silos within those banks and technology systems. I mean, that's almost an impossible goal for them to try to achieve.
Yeah, I like the I never found a way to like word this really well, or I'd have put it in some sort of article or something, but it's like there's a race between, can the challenger banks grow significantly enough that they can make money sustainably and increase their services portfolio, right? So can the challenger banks get big enough quicker than the incumbent banks can scale down all of their technical debt, right? Because, if you look at it at face value, the difference between an incumbent bank and a challenger bank is like a very nice experience. But other than that, speed and the app, they're still a bank, right? They still offer financial services. So there's kind of this race to the middle point. And I think when a few of the players get to that middle point of being like really scalable, they don't have all this like, decades, hundreds of years maybe of technical debt, like political debt, they can move quickly. Like there's no reason why, and Barclays is a good example of this, right? Barclays were a really good incumbent bank. There's no reason why Barclays can't be as good or as quick as Monzo. Like I think if they can strip back some of that like legacy kind of weight, yeah, there's no reason why they wouldn't. But that I like the race. I like the idea that there's kind of this like who can get to the middle first.
Do you think that's a great analogy within the race itself? Do you think the new disruptive banks are going to start to pick up? Obviously it's a long race, right? To get to where it is, pick up some of the bad habits or systems and end up themselves. Where's the meeting point? Is it slap bang in the middle, or is it going to be slightly one-sided or the other?
Yeah. I think if you look at Revolut, you see that now. Right, Revolut have grown substantially in users, but also in things they do. And the app is cluttered, right? There's no way around of me like dancing around it. The app is cluttered. It does too much stuff. customer support, they barely got back to me on any of my tickets, right? They don't have a phone line. Like Revolut are in this, they've grown so quickly that they're struggling in the same way the incumbent banks did. And it's tough. Like, I don't know how these banks will grow sustainably. Like, I don't know, but you can definitely see the difference between, Starling and Monzo, who have drip fed features out, over time, and Revolut, who have gone from 10 to 100 to 500 features. You can see that happen like in real time.
Yeah, that's a great point. As you say, in order to catch up with their rapid growth and dropping these features that are required in the app, they've fallen into exactly the same trap that the incumbent banks are, and maybe are losing their thing, which is a great lesson to learn for some of the other banks who aren't growing quite as quickly, but to manage that deployment of those features. Talking of features a little bit, it was great. Interested in some of the surprises that you discovered through that. One that I particularly picked up on was the push notifications that you got when you were talking with customer service from Monzo, which I hadn't come across yet, actually, which I thought was a great technique in order to deliver relevant content based upon what was happening in a separate channel for customer experience.
Yeah, that was amazing. That, I've spoken to Monzo about that since, and, I think it took them by surprise how great it was, right? Like, they knew it was good, but they were like, yeah, this is really cool, actually, now you talk about it. And it's like, and I hadn't thought of doing it. It's not like I was like, oh, I wish a bank would do this amazing thing. I saw it and I was like, holy hell, like, that is incredible. Like, why did no one else think of that? And,
absolutely.
and it was in that moment I was like, as soon as I write about this, everybody's going to copy it, right? Like, because all these banks will, and they should. And in 2 years, I imagine everyone will have eventually done that. But
well, and beyond just banking, I mean, in all elements of customer service, you're converging channels to deliver a better.
Yeah, the customer service chapter in particular was a bit frustrating. To do, because it's like the relationship between the smartphone in my hand and the person I'm trying to speak to, it's like they've forgotten the fact I'm holding the app. Yes. And it's like, I am on your app with all the functionality in front of me. I've verified myself, it's me, and I'm still then calling people and having to verify myself with telephone banking pins. And there was a part of that I took out, actually, that was Face ID. So Apple's claim, right, that Face ID is correct, incorrect 1 out of 1,000,000 times. So, and they're quite loose with that number. So I don't know if that's 1 in 1,000,000 faces are so similar it'll work anyway, or there's a 1 in 1,000,000 chance of it failing, or what. But, coincidentally, the likelihood of randomly guessing a 6-digit PIN number is also 1 in 1,000,000. So these telephone banking pins that are normally 6 digits are literally as safe as like a biometric, like a Face ID. So once I've already done that Face ID and I'm on the call, there is no good reason to have a PIN, telephone banking PIN. And especially when you think about the safety of a 6-digit number is only that high if people picked random numbers, but they don't. They pick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So the security of PIN numbers, of user submitted PIN numbers, is far less than 1 in 1,000,000. So it's just a case of like, these banks, it's like, and anyone that does customer support, it's like, if you've got that level of security, I honestly think the telephone banking security is just because they haven't worked out how to route people properly. That's why they make you do it. But
I think that as you say, that was a really good chapter, and one that from my own personal experiences, I'd come into, especially at the moment where these customer service centers are all working from home, so response times are delayed and so forth. And you picked up on the fact that, again, because you're going through the app is on the same device that you're holding, so it goes to sleep, and while you're waiting for the chat window to be answered or whatever it is. And that's an enormous frustration, and one that I'm amazed has not got picked up on any particular Q&A testing that these guys have done.
Yeah, I imagine how frustrating it was for me, because I was on like refreshing, like I was obviously doing those chats and waiting for replies, and then swapping between the apps to check, because I rounded to a minute, but I wanted to make sure that the reply that came in wasn't like an automated reply that then it counted as a reply and then it lost the track of the minutes or whatever. So I was literally up for hours, like refreshing all the apps. And every single time I'd have to go, okay, Face ID, yep, right, messages, yep, chat, yep, right. And so that was really annoying. I must have done that hundreds, if not 500, 1,000 times.
It is, and as I just said, I was amazed that they've not addressed that, because it was certainly, I don't know what in their testing, procedure they put in for the default wait time, but clearly it's extended beyond
yeah.
what I tested for.
From my experience with large companies and testing, they rely very heavily on automated testing. Automated testing is like, it sounds like the holy grail, and it's pushed by developers, and it's pushed by developers who see it as a way to not test their own code. Like, developers largely don't enjoy testing their stuff, because if they find a problem, they've then got to do some more work, right? It's just a way that people work, and it's I'd be the same. But automated testing sounds like, oh, we just build this test once and then it's always checked for it to work. But UX especially is almost impossible to detect through data. Like, these companies that look at data to determine UX problems, it's totally backwards. Like, most UX problems, like, how can you tell if someone's frustrated in data unless they leave, right? But most people don't leave when they get frustrated. They just stay frustrated. Yeah. And it's the same with automated testing. Like, who's building that UX test in automated testing, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if they had fixed it once and then they broke it and no one ever fixed it, and no one ever found it, right?
Yeah, caught up in the loop. So we've been discussing some kind of innovative technologies and processes that might be implemented, but looking kind of maybe backwards and looking at the learnings that from this test that you discovered from the old guard, the incumbent banks. What are some of the things that new up and coming fintechs and startups maybe could look to learn from the findings of this, from the troubles that some of the older banks are finding themselves in?
Yeah. Well, I guess broadly, I would be worried by the Revolut approach that we've already talked about. I think, there's a certain inevitability of history repeating itself here as these guys grow. Maybe, code these days, there are better languages than C# and more scalable solutions, so maybe you won't have that problem. But if you look at, I think the freezing your card chapter, that kind of highlighted an area where my personal opinion was that all of the challenger banks had done worse than the incumbent banks, and that was purely because they had built this functionality and kind of missed the context of what it was there for. But I mean, there's a few different ways you can look at that, and that's a whole topic in itself. But largely, I think the challenger banks were better. It was the exception if they were worse, and in the instances where they were worse, I feel like it's easy to slip up 1 out of 100 times. Yeah.
So with that, for looking at from the startup standpoint, what are the learnings do we think that the business to business side of banking and fintech can maybe draw from this, which is a consumer focused side of a UX examination?
What do you mean, the business banking within these apps?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah. These are predominantly consumer focused banks, but looking at the business divisions of the larger banks, and also any fintechs that have a B2B standpoint, which is typically a few steps behind the consumer side of these offerings. What are some of the learnings do you think that transpose very easily between the two?
Yeah. So I think business banking, from my experience with business banking, in my startup, and then now as Built for Mars business banking, right? it's a lot more difficult to build for, because there are so many different contexts to consider. So, the name Built for Mars actually is kind of a reference to products should be built to work in any context. It should be built for, like, someone could use it in Mars, someone should be able to use it in your lab in the UK where you've built this nice product. But business banking, there's so many different instances, like, secondary cards and, people who aren't the decision makers but may spend money on that card, and how that all plays in. So it's like, if you think about the study I did on consumer banking, there's probably one out there that's 50 times larger that you could do on business banking. But because there are so many nuances, it's so specific that people would be like, why are you talking about this example, right? Like, how many people is that? And it's like, well, maybe only 1,000 people in the UK, but for them, it's really annoying.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, business banking is like vehicle automation, in that there's like a tail end of problems. But
maybe volume 2, no?
It would take me about 3 years, but so yeah, 2022 release date. I'll start now.
There you go. So talking about the banks, have any of them reached out to you, post this? And I know obviously that there was a lot of sharing of the content and social kind of communication from the banks, but directly to you?
Yeah. So I've spoken to all the banks, actually. In one remit or another. Some of them I've worked with, some of them I've done sort of Q&A sessions with, some of them have told me that I'm wrong in a lot of places. So
very defensive.
Well, so there's one I won't say who it was, but there's one in particular that came across quite badly in some of the chapters, and felt like I was unfair in my judgment. I kind of take that on the chin, but 11 of the banks, they all thought it was really fair. And yeah, I think I tried to take my opinion out of who is best. Like, you'll notice I didn't rank them, right? And I very rarely said, like, this bank has done really well, unless it was something that I felt like they had earned, right? And like the Monzo example at the end, someone at Monzo or some team at Monzo made something really cool that the world will copy, and they should get some credit for that. But yeah, the banks, I think, were largely pretty receptive to it.
Yeah, well, in some cases, the numbers don't lie. At the end of the day, it costs this much, or the certain number of clicks, or whatever it is. It is what it is.
Well, the numbers don't lie, but I did this on my phone in my house, and this isn't a scientific study. Like, in an ideal world, you'd have hundreds of thousands of these to, like, mean average and even better, more accurate result. And I think that was one of their complaints, and it's like, that's totally fair, right? I've shown all my workings as I've done this, and I've not tried to claim it's anything other than my experience. But I'm like a guy that's eaten at every restaurant in Brighton, and I'm like, this was my favorite, and then everyone's gone, nah, if you came back, would it be better, right? And I'm like, well, it was my favorite at the time, right?
Yeah. Have any of them taken any learnings from it? Do you know?
Yeah.
Again, without having to name names, but just
yeah. So, one of the thing I want to do, I don't know when, and I don't know how, but I want to do a recap chapter, and I could do it now, but the number of changes that have been made are quite small. But obviously, if I did it in 6 months, I'd be able to show you exactly who changed what, right? And that's really interesting to me, because some of these banks are really receptive, and every time I was releasing a new chapter, they'd be effectively emailing me like, hey, that's great, like, how do we fix this thing? And it's like, yeah, awesome, this is why you're at the top, right? Like, I'm just a guy giving you my opinion, and you're listening, and they're not just listening to my opinion, they're listening to all of their users' opinions. So I think if I was to do that chapter, let's say at the end of the year, you'd have a pretty good idea of like, look, these guys were slow in 2020 and they're continuing to be slow, and they still haven't fixed this bug. that was around, and they definitely knew about it. You know, because they all know about the issues now. So
that's true. That would be fascinating, I have to admit. And you banking people out there, you've been warned. So
well,
get on it.
I'm trying to give them enough time, because I was going to do it immediately, because some of the challenger banks had changed stuff straight away, and I was like, wow, that's quick. I should just release this now, because I had so much like engagement, and for me, another chapter would have obviously boosted my newsletter subs by a lot more. But I was like, it's not fair, because these incumbent banks, they don't have release times of once a week. They have like once a month, and they might have already fixed it, but haven't been able to release it. And it's like, I want to give them all enough time that you can sit and go, you haven't fixed this bug in 6 months, and that's unreasonable, right? But it has to be that. It has to break into that period of time, I think.
We'll definitely look out for that, because that'll be fascinating. So, what advice do you think you would give for these incumbent banks looking to reinvent themselves, as far as ones that maybe have struggled a little bit?
Yeah, try and strip back as much of your like political debt as possible. So some of these banks that I speak to, so some of them work with me. So I do UX stuff on the side, right? And that's obviously great, but some of them are like, we'd love to work with you, but there's too many managers that I don't know. Like, throwing your opinion into this would be like throwing grenades somewhere, and we can't see where it lands. Like, we don't know who we're going to really annoy. And, that was really honest of one of these kind of people quite high up in one of these banks. So it's like, strip back that political debt. Like, you don't need to pay me to do this. You've probably got the resources internally that can do this, but strip back that debt and let the people who are good at their job already in your organization solve this problem, right? And if you can't, then get external help. There are plenty of great UX people out there. But you probably have the resources, and you probably already know what the problems are, right? Like, these people at these banks, they use the apps themselves, and I bet they're annoyed at some of the stuff in that app. So it's like, just paying attention and trying to strip back some of that kind of function and the process of fixing stuff, I think.
Within you already mentioned that you don't like to rank things, but within the work that you did and the various chapters within it, were there some that surprised you or you think gained greater insight than others? I mean, which are the ones that really kind of bubbled up from it? They were all good, of course, but which ones?
Yeah. So I'll name a few, and these aren't in order of anything. So I think I was most impressed by Barclays and Starling. I thought Barclays were like incredible. As an incumbent bank, they did really, really well. If Barclays was launched today as a challenger bank, they would be as good as a challenger bank, right? And I mean that in a nice way. Starling really impressed me because I hadn't used Starling personally, and my opinion of Starling was irrationally like not as good as Monzo, right? Like, I had this opinion of Starling that was totally unjustified, and they actually surprised me. And
is that from a branding standpoint, do you think? Is it that misconception?
Possibly. Like who knows, right? When you see Pepsi versus Coke, you're like, oh, I love one and I hate the other, right? And you don't know why. It's just somewhere out there, someone did some marketing that really hit my brain. But yeah, I'd never used Starling personally, and I was super impressed by them. Starling are one of the accounts that I'll keep open because I just thought they were really good. They're really good all round, and in many ways they're better than Monzo. In some ways they were worse, but I think those two impressed me. Lloyd's impressed me a lot. I thought Lloyd's was really good. Yeah, and then I think you've got like a middle, and then obviously Monzo and Revolut did very well in their own areas, and yeah.
Interesting. I know they don't do. I know American. It's interesting to me because looking at that, and American Express was obviously absent because they don't do. They're not a traditional bank. Obviously, they're much more of a card, but they do have a stronger kind of focus on the experience of being a customer of theirs. I don't know if you've had any experience with them as a company, or whether your take on what that might hold as far as a large traditional bank and their focus on experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, I use Amex myself. I think they're good. I mean, they're all right.
You're not just saying that, I know, because of Brighton as well. That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, they're good sponsors of Brighton Hove Albion. So until that dies. No, like Amex are good, right? Like I would say Amex, their customer experience, like we talked about earlier, right? Their customer experience is really good. And so there are a few times, like right now, so I had to postpone my honeymoon because of coronavirus and stuff. And they're helping me, well, they should be helping me get some of my money back from flights and things that otherwise I can't. And I don't know any other bank that would be able to do that or bother to do that, right? So, the user experience of using Amex seems really good. Yeah. But as an app, I don't think the app is as good as the challenger banks apps.
No, interesting. So the challenger banks, typically always put on a kind of pedestal as far as you say, from a UX standpoint, as far as being mobile first and delivering superior experiences, and as you proved, certainly from a experience and time standpoint in dealings with them. Are there any other companies or industries, do you think, that are doing particularly poorly or particularly well, that maybe learnings could be taken from one, or that they should in fact take learnings from the banking industry?
Well, I think everyone, one of the things I really want to do a better job of in 2020 and beyond with Built for Mars is like the free content. So, showing that, like, one of the reasons why I do case studies and stuff like Disney Plus is that it's not because people massively care about Disney Plus, and it's not because many people are designing competitors to Netflix, right? Like, it's that you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, we have a password field in our app and it doesn't do that, right? Or it does do that. And so in banking, I think part of the reason why it got so much attention and it seemed to be appreciated by so many people was that it's kind of not about banking, right? It's like, here's just an experience of using some stuff. And, if you were designing a game, you'd still be able to look at some of this and go, that's kind of similar to a thing that we do. And, when you phone up our company for customer support, we don't do that stuff, or, so I think hopefully any industry could take something from the study. Hopefully. That's kind of not for me to claim, right? Every industry can learn something.
I think there's a lot to be learned. As you say, an experience is an experience, and typically experiences are an emotional kind of feeling. So, if these processes or this lack of communication or this lack of response makes me feel bad, it's going to make me feel bad whether I'm banking. I might be more sensitive about it because it's my money as opposed to groceries or whatever else. But certainly if the amount of time it takes you to get responses from customer service lines is going to be equally distressing in a bank as it would be, as you said, with a vacation or a holiday or airline or something along those lines. So
so one of the things that, like, I'm doing more. So, I normally do the case studies. This banking thing, I called it a publication because I basically wrote a book by mistake. Like, when I started it, I didn't think it would be this long, and it turned out to be this long, right? And it could have been much longer. But I'm doing more, and so I've got, I'm going to try and do probably 3 a year. They do take a lot of time, and I'm fitting it around other stuff. But it's like, this format of taking an industry that people generally have like quite a poor perception of and showing you like why they're so poor. Like, I would love to do, this isn't the one I've got planned next, but I would love to do one on car UI systems, right? Purely because I use that example all the time, but also like they are terrible. Like, I don't know if you've ever got in like you know, I'm going to pick on someone like Toyota, right? And you've seen that like non-touch screen and you've got the wheel and you have to go to the settings. It's like, you know, this is the worst thing I've ever used. um, uh, you know, and stuff like that. I think that would be really interesting. Unfortunately, I can't buy a car from every manufacturer in the same way I open a bank, right? I would need some help to do that. But,
you have to get in touch with like a what car or something like that has access to the demo stuff. And so I need it
well,
from here for a week.
yeah. Well, you know, I am doing. I'm doing 3 studies next with other companies on various things like that. You know, and part of the reason is it helps me get access to exactly what you just said, right? So yeah, there's good stuff coming, but like I don't know when really.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to it and reading it. So, you know, a brilliant series. Like I say, all 6 chapters are out there. I did want to touch on a little bit more UX focused like questions and things kind of beyond the actual work that you did on those 6 chapters, the publication. So if you're, you know, if you're sitting there listening to this and you are, you know, either a startup or an existing company, and you know, you've read your publication and you think, yeah, we're well short of where we need to be, or you know, I know from fact that, you know, my competition is doing a better job. Where's a good place to start? How do you start that process in doing better from an experiential standpoint?
Yeah. So I think it depends on, you know, and I'm going to try and give an answer that's like non-biased towards my job and career, right?
Right,
But
it's your interview.
but I think it's like I said about the banks. There are people probably inside most companies that can do this stuff, and you know, I know plenty of junior UX designers that would be great in companies to do things. So it's like the first step would be, you know, do you have anyone inside your organization that has the ability, the experience, you know, has spent enough time with products to understand the nuance of what we're doing? And if the answer is yes, you need to give them as much space and time and freedom and, you know, exec decisions as they need to change how things work. If you don't have that, you'll need to bring someone in, and, you know, how that might mean hiring someone as a one-off, or that might mean hiring someone as a role, right? But I would encourage companies to look at UX as a role that isn't UI. Like, don't get a designer who also has UX and expect them to be great at building UX, because they're having to design and critique their own work, which step 1 is a terrible idea, right? Like, that just doesn't work. Like, I wouldn't be able to design and then critique stuff. Like, if you look at Built for Mars, if I got like someone else to critique Built for Mars, I bet it'd be terrible and I'll be ashamed of myself, right? And it's just impossible to like critique the stuff you build. It's really difficult. So it's just like finding that person and then giving them a culture of like, we readily change stuff. We obsess over making things better. You know, we will sit for 10 minutes and we will discuss whether that thing should be 5 pixels or 10 pixels, you know, and given that we're not wasting time doing other stuff, right? Like that might be a valuable thing to do, because all of these small changes add up to an experience that's much nicer and much, you know, more consistent than whatever. And I think one of the, you know, looking into these organizations, one of the key factors that I spot early on with companies I work with is, do they have a culture where UX change will be possible themselves? And that comes down to, you know, if I suggest like, yeah, this is really frustrating, you need to change this, and, you know, it's such a petty thing, you know, do they go, yeah, we could, or is it like, yeah, fine, okay, next, like, give me the next 100 things.
Yeah.
Right. Because, you know, if you start getting resistance internally, like if you're working on a product and you go to your manager and say, I really want to redesign this page because, you know, whatever, something really small, you know, and it's kind of like, you've got better things to worry about, then it just kills the culture of UX. And to their credit, these challenger banks have that culture from what I can see.
So yeah, and that would be then key, as you're saying there, is positioning UX with the authority or the credibility, I suppose, to constantly be pushing the various other groups in order to maintain a continuous learning or improvement process within service offering or the software.
Yeah, exactly. And these teams who build great UX themselves, challenger banks, they have that culture internally where they'll challenge each other, and they're like a super self-sufficient team to build stuff, right? And very occasionally they might bring someone in to go, like, it's been 2 years now, can someone new look at this, and then we'll be off again. And we don't need someone in every day of the week, right, to help us. We've got that. Some of these other companies that don't have that culture, they may not have those people in place, and for them, like these incumbent banks, right, having a list, like literally I've given them a list of like, here are 50 things to change, and you'll be much better. Like, out of those banks, again, this like 7th chapter, you'll be able to see which ones have that culture of like paying attention to the small things. Yeah, I think so, hopefully. I mean, if they all change everything, it'll be kind of boring, right?
Yeah,
It's
very true.
Yeah.
So within the UX community, there is a considerable amount of debate around the roles of personas, particularly in defining UX, and then also slightly more recently, kind of the jobs to be done kind of lens. Now, obviously, you didn't have any personas necessarily built from this particular study, so it really was a study done really from a jobs to be done. You had set goals, and you were trying to perform them. I was just curious as to your take. There's the argument that if your personas are created correctly, then jobs to be done is irrelevant, and there's those that say that that's not the case at all. I'm just curious as to your take on that.
Yeah. So I probably have a unconventional take on this. So I would do none of them. I think people spend too much time trying to create a structure for this sort of stuff. And if personas work for you, great. If jobs to be done works for you, great. But fundamentally, there's like a deeper level of understanding, which is like, like the customer services one, right? I don't have a huge amount of experience with customer service. I didn't need a persona to understand that customer service was bad and what needed to be fixed. The persona is me, right? And fortunately, people working on products are also people, right? And so it's like, if you're working on a product, and it's not a product that any 5 of you would use yourself, like, you're the wrong people to build that product. Like, if you're like 5 guys building a product for like, women tracking their pregnancy, you're going to get it wrong, because you're going to not understand what those people are thinking. It doesn't matter if you go, oh, we've got a persona of, she's a lady. It's like, okay, great. How about you just get some women to build this, because they're going to understand this product far more intimately than can ever be described or written down, all gathered from like user interviews. It's one of the reasons why I would only ever build companies of stuff that I would use myself. I am that persona for me, right? But again, if personas work for you, fine, right?
There you go. So taking that a step further and saying, so if we're always designing, and if everybody's designing around specifically, their customers' needs, whether it be you or pregnant ladies, for whatever the thing is, so we're all designing, human-centeredly and empathetically. How then do we differentiate
between?
Well, if we're all my competitors, we're all designing the very best that we can do based on the insights and the needs of our audience, our personas, or our targets, then how do we innovate? If we're all doing the best that we can do from an empathetic standpoint, then where do we go from there?
Yeah. So it's like, you know, you give 1,000 people the same camera and you'll end up with, you know, to take photos of the same thing, and one of them will be the best. And there is, you know, like, in fact, that's, you know, when I look at a photo, I can tell you if it's like a good photo, but I don't know what makes a good photo, right? So I would be at the bottom end of that list, right? You'd be going, oh Jesus, like that one's, you know, no one's saving that one. You know, it's the same with product. Like, you know, the example of women building pregnancy trackers is probably too crude, because, you know, you don't need that. What you need is at least a few people on that team to understand, you know, that product. And then fine, you may have some people that don't understand that product, but they're led by the people that do. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at. Maybe I was too kind of extreme with that example, but I don't believe that if you give everyone the same input, they will come out with the same output. Like, you know, Johnny Ives designed the iPhone and the iPod, right? And he had the same inputs as everybody else, but that is something that's better than other phones, right? So, you know, I would trust that if you give people the same input, someone will do a better job.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. And that pretty much wraps it up for today. Peter, thank you so much for your great insight and for chatting to us today. I'll put links to obviously to Built for Mars and also the UX work, the publication that you did, and within this. And thank you very much.
Cool. Cheers.